China has been marking 40 years of reform and opening up this month. During those years, the country went from one of the poorest economies in the world to being its second biggest. Now, part of that journey has been lifting itself out of poverty. That's something China's National Bureau of Statistics says it's done for nearly all rural residents. Nationwide, that's 770 million people since 1978, an astounding number that actually accounts for 70% of poverty reduction worldwide. But China says it's not done yet. It hopes to eliminate extreme poverty in the next year or so. For more on that, let's bring in John Gong. He's a professor of economics at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. Professor Gong, thank you for joining us. China has played a central role in reducing poverty globally. What sort of economic policies did it have in place to do so?
I think it's mostly attributed to the determination of the central government. I think over the years that this government is rich enough, our country is rich enough to be able to address this issue. It's really, I think there's a couple of measures that the government has adopted. For example, one thing is the fiscal money from the budget, government budget. The second thing is to encourage local banks in collaboration with local governments to provide employment or business opportunities for these people and other means. So, a combination of these things driven by a very strong determination of the central government is able to jointly achieve this goal very, very shortly.
And China says it wants to do more. As we mentioned, it wants to eradicate extreme poverty, and we know it wants to reform and open up even further. What does that entail?
Well, first of all, I think it's also the government's policy to entirely eliminate all poverty. I mean, we still have a fair number of people in very remote areas in China, in southwest, for example, in northwest areas that are still quite impoverished. These are the things that we typically don't see in cities here, like in Beijing and Shanghai. And these people still need some help. I think our government is very keen on basically provide a kind of a social welfare that covers these people. Now, in terms of the open door policy, I think our government is very clear that we will continue the course started by Mr. Deng Xiaoping 40 years ago, to continue the open door policy against the backdrop of the trade tension between the United States and China. This is a very structural problem, and we have been maintaining a trade surplus with the United States in hundreds of billions of dollars every year, and obviously we all know that it's not sustainable over the long run, both politically and economically. So we are trying to alleviate this issue. In addition to this, I think we also would like to address some of the structural issues as asked by the United States government. For example, in areas of intellectual property right protection, in areas of curtailing state subsidies, in areas of stopping forced technology transfer, opening up more market access, and all these things ultimately are also in Chinese government's interest, in our own interest. So these are the things we're going to do.
And how do you think
I am quite hopeful that, sorry.
How do you think Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative factors into China's plans, not just to boost its own economy, but also, as it says, to improve lives for people around the world?
Yeah, well, the idea of Belt and Road Initiative, of course, is to focus on the buildup of infrastructure in those host countries, in the countries affected by the Belt and Road Initiative. And the hope is that by building up this infrastructure, it will facilitate trade and consequently also provide more economic development opportunities for these countries. These countries are mostly in the third world countries, developing countries, and they tend to have increasing trade with China. And of course, in this process, this immense amount of investment will definitely create a lot of jobs in those countries. And in addition to the infrastructure build-out, there are also investments from the private sector as well as the state sector here in China in these countries in the manufacturing sector. Now we're starting to see more and more outward foreign direct investment from China in these countries. because the rising wage level here in China, some lower-end, labor-intensive manufacturing is already starting to move out of China en masse. So I think these activities, investment in infrastructure as well as investments in manufacturing, will definitely create a lot of jobs in those countries.